I'm Caitlin. I'm one of the admins at Locally Optimistic. And we host these meetups every week or two just to kind of chat about things that are interesting to the community. A lot of times they end up being very sort of audience led. So if you've got questions, jump in. But mostly I'm going to turn this over to Molly to kick us off.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, my name is Molly. I lead content and communications for Monte Carlo. But in a prior life, I worked at Uber, leading brand and technical content. And today we're talking about something that is very interesting to me personally, and something that I'm not very good at, which is just negotiation, whether that's in the context of salary, in the context of dealing with stakeholders, vendors, people on your team, whoever that is. So on the panel today, we have Joe Abbott, who is a head of product marketing at Zendesk, but has plenty of awesome experience when it comes to specifically salary negotiation and dealing with stakeholders. We have Trupti Natu, who leads risk at Uber, and particularly she has a lot of great experience with managing teams and dealing with negotiation and difficult conversations in that context. And then Nika Duan is an investor with Emerson Collective, and she has extensive experience working with other companies kind of in her portfolio. And then prior, she was a consultant kind of working with vendors and other stakeholders. So with that, I will let each of you on the panel kind of introduce yourselves and maybe talk a little bit more about your experience and how it relates to negotiation. So Joe, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Molly. Again, I'm Joe. I'm a head of product marketing here at Zendesk, where I've spent about the last 3 years. Been working in software for the last 7 years across startups and tech juggernauts. And I think sort of my experience is I've worked at 3 or 4 different places in my career. And so I've had a lot of these different conversations about titles and salary, and then worked within large organizations where compromise and negotiation is just key to getting things done. So excited to share sort of what I think are some best practices, and excited to meet you all.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And then Trupti, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone. Hi, I'm Trupti. Like Molly said, we met at Uber. I lead the risk disbursement team at Uber. I'm still here I've been here for a little over 3.5 years. And this topic is pretty close to my heart. I think a lot of people that I mentor struggle with it and come to me. And I've had a management consulting background that kind of helps me with stakeholder management, or in general to managing difficult conversations, or it also probably comes naturally to me. So happy to help out if my experience makes any difference. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Trupti. And then Nika, why don't you introduce yourself?
Perfect. Hey, everyone. I'm Nika. It's great to be here with you all. Like Molly said, I come to this work by way of management consulting. I was at Bain for a number of years, and so did a bunch of the stakeholder management with various types of clients. And now in a venture role at Emerson, we invest kind of pre-seed all the way to pre-IPO stages. And so it's always interesting to it's some negotiations with startups. It's also a lot of feedback. And so happy to share a bit more about my experiences there.
Awesome, thank you. And as Caitlin mentioned, if anyone has any kind of their own thoughts about any of the topics we're talking about, feel free to weigh in here. This is definitely a conversation. So to kind of kick it off, one question that I have for you and everyone in the group is, how do you overcome kind of the mental hurdle of conflict avoidance? Personally, I'm someone that wants everyone to be happy. And so I, stop at nothing short to make sure everybody, is content and there's peace. But I know that to actually get stuff done, you have to, surface multiple viewpoints and be constructive. So do any of you want to take it away? So specifically, the question was, how do you overcome the mental hurdle of conflict avoidance in a workplace setting?
I'm happy to go first. And actually, I love that Trupti said that this is something that she's comfortable with. I'm going to say I'm probably on the other end of the spectrum. It's been a real learning experience. It's not something, I'm probably closer to Molly. I think there are two things that I keep in mind now, a bunch that I've heard over my career. One is clarity is kindness, and the other is feedback is a workout. It's really uncomfortable, but it's good for you. And then clarity is kindness. Like it truly, like being able to tell people, being transparent, being honest, like giving folks your real take on things, is just kindness. So I feel like I'm often in conversations where it's uncomfortable. Like I think at this point, I've probably passed on hundreds of companies now, and each of those conversations are like, it's always uncomfortable. But I think coming into these conversations for me, that my style is coming in with empathy and understanding and being able to share feedback, because I think they'll be able to improve from what I tell them. And so I think it changes my perception of something being necessarily framed as conflict avoidance to now I'm actually like hoping to help someone improve in their journeys. If I don't give them the feedback, but all my investor friends are talking about the same things that went wrong with their pitch, or the same things that we're concerned about with their business, they're never gonna improve if someone doesn't actually step up and share that feedback, right? And so I try to push myself to come in with that lens of, again, I should do the hard work because I want these companies to be successful, and so I want to be honest and I want to be upfront with how I'm feeling.
Awesome. Thanks, Nika. Anyone else?
Yeah, I kind of echo with that, but when I said I'm comfortable, I feel like I'm very analytical. So I go with the first principles basis, and like Nika said, like transparency is key. So just make sure you show all the data that you have and the research as to like, if someone's coming to you saying that, hey, this is #1 priority for me, or I want you to unblock this for me. If you go in with all that you have and why a short-term fix may not be the right one right now, even though that might unblock them, but in the longer term, you might just have more work to do or something. The more transparent you are with your approach and thinking and why you're pushing back, I think people at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. For example, if it's a Uber conversation, we all want better for our own company. We are all shareholders. If it's back in the day when I was a consultant, it's the betterment of the company and then the project or whatever it is. So show them the big picture. So in the short term, even if there are some no's along the way, I think everyone's in for that longer term goal. And maybe once you unlock and open up that transparent thinking or your ways of getting there, maybe you will learn something along the way too, which is like, oh, you know what, my assumptions were wrong. You helped me show something, and now I'm gonna change my model, and maybe let's go your way. So that difficult conversation ends up being, most times you'll be surprised, but that's how I've made some lifelong friends along the way. It started off as a difficult conversation, but we just understood each other better. So that would be my 2 cents.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just add something to that. I think those were really great points. And I think a lot of it for me, and this was a struggle I had early in my career. I'm definitely a very agreeable person, much like Molly. But I think part of being successful in negotiations and conflict management is depersonalizing it, understanding that it's just work. It's not like your partner or your parents. It's basically a working relationship. And if you approach it with diplomacy and grace and thoughtfulness, I think those are the lasting behaviors that when you get to the other side of the conflict, the person that you're working with will remember about you. And I think at the end of the day, it's conflict's important in improving relationships. And that's often the only way to get through and move relationships forward. In the case of a work conflict, it's often what's best for the business. And so keeping in mind that the conflict is mutually beneficial, and at the end of the day, you still need to work together, and being thoughtful and graceful is super key.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So another question that I have, like more specifically, deals with salary negotiation. I know that this is a difficult topic for a lot of people, myself included. I actually had a boss once like not fight me on it, but kind of, I pushed back a little bit and showed why I thought that I was in the right to ask for more, and they felt like they were being fair, and we were kind of in like a plateau, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is awkward. So what are some tactics that you found for successfully navigating salary negotiations specifically? And if you have any kind of specific anonymized anecdotes to share, that would be great as well.
I can start with this one. I think I really liked what Trupti said earlier about having the data and doing your homework. I'd say that's one of my top things, is coming into the conversation knowing what's unfair, what's fair, and then what's sort of unreasonable to ask for. And part of that is doing research on whether it's exactly knowing your real market value, doing research in various forums, whether that's Glassdoor or former employers. For example, I just went through a salary negotiation and reached out to my former boss, who is hiring somebody in my role at their current company, and had a really transparent conversation with them about what kind of offer they would give, what would be on the low side, what would be on the high side. And then on top of that, I think it's important, again, not to take it personal. I think everyone has different methodologies when it comes to putting together an offer, and just continue being 100% confident in yourself and your abilities and what you bring to the table. And I'll add a nice little nugget at the end. I think it's okay to be a little bit unreasonable. I think the worst an employer can do is say no. And I think oftentimes they come into the conversation expecting a negotiation. And so often it's expected, and I think it's totally okay to be a little bit unreasonable.
Definitely. I think I agree with everything there. I think I will double down my same thing. It's like data is key. Just knowing your worth and knowing what's out there and what the company is even willing to offer. You know, it's like specifically talking about salary negotiations. I think you need to understand which company has more equity flexibility versus base versus some people just don't do sign-on bonus and stuff. Just knowing where they lean towards will empower you, and all this information now is available in so many forums and word of mouth, and like just network is the key. But I'll give you a flip side of the coin, which is like, yes, definitely bargain and get what you're worth. Know how you perform during the interview, as well as you have a hunch of, it's like, oh, this was a strong yes from everybody, or oh, I could have done better. But I would say also keep in mind that going a little bit as an underdog might have longer term better wins than aggressively negotiating something and then setting yourself up for a bar you may or may not be able to meet or overcome. So just keep that and be humble about that as well. Sometimes if that's the most you're going to get and you still feel like that's a tad bit short, then you have that extra grit to prove that, look, I am at this level, you gave me this. And the next time you're gonna go in for perf, you have much more, again, the data behind you, and you can have better wins than going to a new company, new business environment, new stakeholders, new management, new team members. Is a lot of new. And you might want to set a bar a tad bit lower is okay. But again, not to be taken as something to be taken advantage of, but just giving you the flip side of what Joe said.
Yeah, I love what you all have already shared. I guess maybe let me just reframe the conversation a little bit. So from the investor perspective, when I talk to CEOs today, like talent is probably the number one or number two concern of all of these CEOs. And for me right now, like being in the position where I have to help them hire, where all of our companies have at least like 10 open roles, constantly I'm like, where do I find good talent? And when we find good talent, and the advice that we give them is like, look, don't make dumb short-term decisions when you have really good people that's gonna like immediately take off a bunch from your workload and help you grow the business. And so I just wanted to share the perspective from the hiring side because it is such a pain point. And so I just want you all to, like, I'm sure you all are incredible talent. And so I just want to like pump people up a little bit to be like, actually, you guys are amazing. Because I think one of the things I didn't know, and this is a little bit of a personal anecdote too, is so I negotiated for my salary when I went to go work for Emerson, and they were actually quite fair. But what I didn't know is after the fact, so one of my coworkers said, look, our managing director literally said to kind of the guy who was at the time, the manager and the person who was working to hire me, he was like, I don't care what you have to do to close her, like get on a plane and fly to Dallas, whatever it is you need to do. And I think I just, sometimes it's hard to remember that when you're in the application process where you're like, yeah, like I'm great and I should be paid my worth and I should go and negotiate for their salary. So just a little bit of that perspective for you all. And then I think also just maybe another two other thoughts. One is, and Trupti mentioned this too, like be creative. You know, like for us, Emerson was like, we don't really do bonuses, but we could give you a bigger relocation. A one-time relocation is different, right? And you know, there was negotiations around, you know, when do I get carry, which is kind of similar to equity. What does that look like? What does the timeline look like? I think you can just, there's a, depending on the type of company you're at, there's just more flexibility in how you pull on which different levers. It may not be just a conversation around the base pay. And there's a couple other resources, I'm sure you all are aware of them, but you know, as we help our companies figure out what's the fair salaries and equity compensation for their employees, I'm happy to share those. I've got a couple of those now that we send out to our CEOs to say, hey, you should check out, you know, option impact as you think about what's the fair amount of equity to give out to your, you know, first engineer or whatever it is. And then on the negotiations piece, I would just say, like, I like practicing. Like, I literally talk out loud. I'm like, what am I going to say? I write down a couple of bullets. What would I say if the conversation went in this direction? So it feels like it's worth the time to practice.
Yeah, 100%. All great insights. I also write down, every time I have a difficult conversation, I write down bullets and sometimes a whole speech, which I don't actually say, but it's just good to have that. I'd be interested to hear if anyone else in the audience has their own experiences or best practices to share, particularly as it relates to salary negotiations, because I know there's wide and varied responses.
I would echo the sentiment around connecting with the previous manager. I did that for one of my previous roles, and that helped me benchmark how aggressive I should be with the salary versus my equity, you know, versus my bonus, because he obviously had one more layer or level above me and seeing across the board with him and VCs what they were expecting to pay out for someone like me. And so that gave me a lot of confidence in going into those negotiations, like just headstrong on this is what I expect and not backing down from it.
So I've been having a really interesting experience recently. This is the first time I've worked in a situation like this, but we fully separate the hiring manager from the salary negotiation conversation. So HR, a recruiter, handles the full salary negotiation, which I find really amazing as a hiring manager, because I can truly just be an advocate for this person and not have to, like, you know, toe this line of like, oh, is this the $5,000 that's going to break it all, which is so frustrating and horrible. But it's great from that very first moment to be able to be that person's advocate and say, like, no, really, it's worth it. Like, I'm going to do all this fighting on your behalf internally. And so it's very much like hiring manager versus recruiter, which is like a healthier negotiation for it all to be totally internal and have it be, you know, we're both aligned that we want the right person, but that we need to, you know, make it work for the company, as opposed to having that power differential. I think it's so hard as a candidate to be talking to your future manager and feel like, oh, well, I have to navigate like all the intricacies of negotiation with someone that I don't know well in a situation where I really want them to still feel really positive at the end. And like, I love that separation, and it's something that I think increasingly, now that I've lived through that, like would really push and encourage to happen, so that you're getting the right people in the conversation at the right level. I think that's just a great dynamic.
We have the same thing. I think the comp and HR team is separate, and I agree with Caitlin that having that separate makes more sense and takes the pressure off of the hiring manager. But at the same time, we also are at the have the voice at the seat of the table to advocate. At the same time, make sure across the team, no one's getting an upper hand or like an unfair advantage just because they're throwing a competitive offer or something like that. You want everyone to like just have the same level playing field. So that's a great practice. I know smaller companies don't have that liberty, but definitely something to think about.
Awesome. All great insights. Thanks, everyone. So kind of moving this in a slightly different direction, another type of negotiation that comes up a lot is dealing with accepting more work in projects and kind of drawing the line, saying like, no, I don't have the bandwidth. It's not that I personally don't want to help you. It's that I have other things on my plate. But that can be pretty hard, particularly when you're getting a bajillion Slack messages a day and it's, I don't know, 8 a.m. and you're like, okay, I can take on this stuff. But then other things start to build up over the course of the day. And before you know it, it's 7 p.m. and you haven't gotten to half the things you said you would do. I'm guilty of that. So how do you say no to accepting more work without burning bridges, upsetting stakeholders, or just kind of generally making people feel like you don't value them and you're not, you don't care what they're working on. Yeah. So how do you say no in those situations?
I can start. I think, sorry, go ahead, Trupti.
Go ahead. You start.
Okay. I think the most important thing to keep in mind, this is from a place of empathy, is like understanding that your colleagues and your peers often don't have a good idea of what your responsibilities are, your working style, your priorities, and especially how you get things done. And I think within a large organization, it can be much more complex and complicated than somebody who sits on the other side of the aisle could even imagine. And so I think on top of that, it's remembering that it's your job and your responsibility alone to establish those boundaries and clearly communicate, what you're working on, and how exactly things get done based on what they're asking for. And so I think I've always been told by my mentors in my career that it's basically mastering the art of saying yes, but actually saying no. And so I think what that actually means, I'll try to articulate this as best as I can, but sometimes it's about asking more questions about what it is they need, and then asking about timelines, and then ultimately coming to a place of compromise, which says, hey, it sounds like you need X, Y, and Z, but I can give you X by this day. And so that's really important. On top of all that, I'd say it's helpful if you have a sort of broader sense of the macro priorities of your organization or your company, and you know who you can partner with and leverage to help you say no. So often that's your manager or your boss who has a bit more authority and who knows exactly what the priorities are for your team. And so that's really, really helpful. But at the end of the day, I think if the ask is fair and it's in the best interest of the business and is going to move things forward, it's all about being prepared to make a compromise and being transparent about what you can and cannot do in a given amount of time.
I was gonna say, before even it comes down to saying yes or no, I think there are a lot of things you can proactively do, especially someone posted on the chat, a team of one. I've been there, especially in 2017 when Uber was growing like a rocket ship. I think setting expectations with your stakeholders is something you could do early on. And what I mean by that is if you are always set them that, Trupti always replies within the same day, or Slack messages, oh, no problem. Within half an hour, I've always gotten a response from him. Next time, instead of half an hour, it's 35 minutes. They're like, oh, is she slacking already? So you have set a certain, you've trained your audience to expect X, and you could slow down a little bit. And we've all done that. And it comes with maturity. It comes with failing once or like learning from those experiences. But next time you do it, you might want to just pace yourself as to a lot of things coming your way. It's not that you're not giving them the priority, but you take a breather and you stack rank them, and the ones that are urgent as well as important in terms of impact. Like there's this, I think you all must have seen the cube model of like cube it into 4 slices, urgent, important, non-urgent, but super important, da da da. So go for that cube first, try to categorize mentally or like even in a to-do list, what is most important, knock those off first. And so once you train your stakeholders that way, I think they will just not be disappointed. And then like at Amazon, we used to say, and I think that's a pretty global phrase now, which is under promise and over deliver. So don't over, oftentimes we try to do the opposite. It's like, oh yeah, I'll do X, Y, and Z. Why not just commit to X? And then Y and Z could be your bonus, and you're always delighting your customers, stakeholders, whoever that is. And that's a muscle memory you have to build, because that's not how human nature works. We are agreeable people and we try to jump on and take on more. But with practice, you could do that. So I would say even before it comes down to making the yes or no decision, there's a lot of things you could do proactively. And then that yes and no becomes quite easy to do.
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of what's been said. For me, I think it really comes down to clear communication, so being transparent, and also prioritization, right? So what is kind of on my plate, what needs to be done within what timeline, and then essentially how do you communicate those set of priorities with what others are asking of you. I think the one thing that I found to be helpful, and again, because it comes down for me to communication, is I've from my past life and also now, when there is the ability to do this, I love being able to share with folks like a how-to guide for me. Like, how do I work? How do I communicate? What's kind of my style? So when I tell you no, and if it's like a clearly delivered no, that doesn't, you don't get automatically offended, or understanding how you work, how you take feedback, whether you like, whether you're a planner or you really like to operate last minute and you really thrive in that. In a less organized environment, like knowing those things about people actually, I think, can help a lot to figure out how to navigate when you have to say no or when you have to say yes, and finding those routes where you can compromise. So I think to me, it's really figuring out the best way to clearly communicate with the person in a way that they can receive it, because it's how they hear things.
Awesome. That's all great insights. Does anyone else have anything to add on that note? I know a lot of you in the chat said +1. I've experienced this, but any other like tips and tricks for handling some of these difficult conversations around work?
I have a couple of comments. Sort of getting back to the salary piece. There's one nice quote that I liked, sort of talking about knowing your worth, which was, if I do a job in 30 minutes, it's because I spent 10 years learning how to do that in 30 minutes. You owe me for the years, not the minutes. And that's something that when I go into negotiations, I always forget, because it's like second nature for me. But then it's like, actually, I have years of experience to make sure to do that really quickly. To Nika's point, I really like that about sort of expressing your personality. I recall one person, like their company did a personality assessment for everybody about how they normally operate and then how they operate under stress. And how those two things, if you're not stressed and this person is stressed, and you have this personality and this person has this personality, you might not get along very well. And so you can conversations can break down. So sort of knowing your audience is really helpful. And there was one other point. I forgot what it was, but yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, all great points. So another kind of taking these conversations a step further. So let's say you had an initial negotiation or conversation with someone, whether it's your manager or a stakeholder, about salary, compensation, or even just like delegating tasks and setting priorities. You have one round of the conversation and it happened, but you aren't satisfied with it, or it left a poor taste in your mouth, which can happen. How do you continue conversations, respectfully, while also making sure that your point of view is heard, even if you're not getting exactly what you want?
It's a really hard question. I think maybe, and I think the answer is a little bit different depending on the context, but I guess I'll share one as it relates to salary negotiations. I think what's been helpful for me in the past is, even if you don't get what it is that you want, having a clear, being able to use that time to then figure out what's the pathway to the thing that you want, so that there are, again, like clear, transparently defined roadmap for you to get to where you want to be. Like, I actually think that's a really big win too. And it of course depends on the type of the company that you're at and the culture of the place. But I think having experienced a place where it was super structured at Bain, where everyone knew, it's just the nature of management consulting, like at every level, you knew exactly how much you made, what the bonus targets would be, what is the path to promotion. And just like, again, having that clarity, I think is something that kind of, after I left that bubble, I was like, wow, this is not the case everywhere else. And so, coming in, I think at Emerson, when none of those processes were defined for me, and essentially starting from scratch on my end, and even for us now, there aren't clear pathways to promotion. So pushing for folks to say, okay, well, if you disagree, I'd love to understand let's see if we can create a plan together to figure out what makes sense as the next set of milestones, so that then we're kind of then working off of the same set of rules, so that I know how to get to the next place that I want to be. I think that's been for me really helpful.
I would say two things. If you went into a conversation, especially I'm talking about stakeholder conversations, because Nika already covered beautifully the salary one, is two things. Either it could be a learning opportunity, and if you're comfortable with your stakeholder, if you have that deeper relationship, then ask upfront, maybe right after the meeting or in a happy hour setting, is to like, what could I have done differently that I could have walked away with what I actually wanted, because clearly I didn't get it or was a little short of that. If you don't have that deep relationship, I would go to a mentor, manager, someone who has probably been through these things and walk them through. It's like, hey, I went in with all the data points. This is how it happened. What could I have done differently? Because we all have blind spots. So it could be take it as in stride as a learning opportunity. So next time you go even more prepared. Or the other route is maybe the other party just didn't have what maybe you had all the great data points, but they just didn't have falling back to the salary conversation, maybe because it's a little bit more black and white. It's like they just have a band they have to stick with. X is the highest, and they're not going to make an exception for you. In which case, you have the upper hand. Sometimes use that and read the room as to do you have that trump card, use it when, and it can be used only once, right? So read the room, and maybe that is your chance to say, hey, I know I clearly had everything that it took, but you couldn't give the X that I wanted, but use that for the next time for something else, a one-time bonus for that example. Or maybe if it's resources, it's like, you know what, in the you'll give me 2 more resources in 2021 or something like that. So I would say use it to your advantage. Not every time you need to win, you know. So, but definitely use that as the other party also knows that they owe you one kind of a thing. Yeah, so those are the 2 ways I would think about it.
I love that. And I think I have a bit of a different take from maybe how I've answered some of the other questions. But I think at this point, when you're at a sort of final stage in negotiation, it's super important more than ever to be transparent and vulnerable. I think especially when you're negotiating with your future manager, because trust is something that's more important than even getting the compensation that you're hoping for. And so I think if you can create that trust through vulnerability and transparency, then you're setting yourself up for like Trupti said, a you owe me situation when you do perform beyond expectations. But I think one thing I'll say that's different is I think if this is the opportunity that you're excited about from a salary or new job offer perspective, that and if you feel like you've gotten to a place where the offer is fair, maybe it's not perfect or exactly what you'd hope for, I think being vulnerable will show your employer that you're in good faith and the opportunity excites you, and there's some room to impress. You'll go in and do a really good job, and I think they will return the favor and give you what you were asking for. I think it's really important overall just to assume good intent and have faith in your employer. If you don't have faith that your employer or hiring manager is going to reward you in a way that reflects your performance, and I think it's probably not a good relationship to go into in the first place.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Any other thoughts or feedback from anyone else in the room?
I have kind of a general question. So my name is Brian, by the way. I'm a data scientist at Weight Watchers, and like I've been here for a while now, and like I feel like, we're long past any negotiation conversations when I signed on, but like, at this point in time, like flirting with the idea of like thinking of other companies and stuff, but like, is there any room for like negotiating like, year-end review, like when you already are somewhere, like in your experience? I feel like that generally doesn't happen, but I'm curious, since all of you have much more experience than I do, if you've ever had any success doing that or had it backfire.
I don't know. I think there's even at a large organization, there are rules and there are salary bands, but I think in almost all cases exceptions can be made. And so I think the kind of going back to the point about communication and transparency, I've been in a similar situation where I thought I was ready sort of for the next level for a promotion, and I had a lot of trouble getting a really clear view of what the roles and responsibilities are between the two roles. And so I think to the point about year-end reviews, I think if you can get that on paper or get that really clearly articulated, that's going to help you a lot and give you a better understanding of whether you're there. Maybe then you can show things that you've done that meet those criteria, or give you a sense of how you can work together with your boss to get there if you feel like it's something that you're close to and deserve.
I would say, I think getting your base right, there's the reason why there's so much emphasis in that where we started, right? The salary negotiation and stuff, but especially the base component of it, because that just drives, as the name suggests, that's your baseline. And so getting that right in the first place is so important, because every incremental progress that you're going to make, whether it's year over year, normal 3% inflation or promotions, will be on top of that base. So make sure that you are at that right base. If that itself you think is off for whatever reasons, you didn't negotiate well, or the company lowball, something happened, then it's harder even for the manager. Being a manager myself, there is only so much you could go with all the data points, but there are just some bigger the company, the policies are just so stringent, obviously, for not to have loopholes in the system. But jumping cross-functional internally, if you love the company, everything else is a good way to do it, because that just resets it. And that's, again, your negotiation power, but you're not changing much. It's under the same umbrella of companies. I wouldn't necessarily advise this, but if you're just wronged so much, and I'm not particularly saying you are, Brian, but if someone is, having a backup option to just show your worth is also one way to do it, but use it sparingly. I would say it might backfire and have other repercussions. Or just sometimes, jumping depending on how much your tenure is and how much you love and see the long-term potential there is the right way to fix it. Unfortunately, that's just how our industry works.
Yeah, I'll build off of both what Joe and Trupti mentioned. So I think one around year-end reviews, one of the things we've been trying to get much better at is how do you actually also have either it's quarterly reviews or bi-monthly checkpoints, where if at the end of the year you're able to say, look, these are like the 5 things that you need to see from me so that I get promoted. Can you actually have that? Maybe that's too late for this season, but can you have that list of like 5-10 things? So then you can check in literally every month or every 2 months on a regular basis, so that at the end of next year, it wouldn't be a surprise, right? It's like, look, we've had this conversation. You know what I've been working on. These are the things that we kind of agreed upon together, and I've made progress across all these things. So, by whatever time, then it should be that it's clear that you've hit on all the requirements for the next promotion. I will also say that I have seen people be successful in leveraging another offer, and I actually would say it's interesting. I don't think it always works. I think it depends a lot on the size of the organization and again how many systems, roles, and processes are in place. But even for myself too, prior to coming to this role, I think what helped me actually understand and benchmark as well as both, I knew kind of what the next level at Bain was going to get paid. And then I also knew and had an offer from another organization that was quite comparable to where I'm at now. And so I think I actually, when they asked me, I mentioned both, and I was like, look, this is kind of the range that I'm working with. And to be honest, I'm not actually sure that I would have felt that way if I hadn't had those numbers. So again, I think that external validation to just say, actually, no, you're not crazy, like you are actually worth this, sometimes can be really helpful.
Thank you all.
I think also, I'm just going to pop in, I think it's really important to understand what it is that's making you want to leave. Like, often salary is like a symptom, not actually the root cause when it comes to actually considering leaving because of salary. It's generally, if you started anywhere in the realm of reasonable, something that's like, that's kind of annoying, but really it probably, your dissatisfaction with that probably represents something bigger about the role or your trajectory or your area of focus or something else. And so I think finding ways to bring those up to the surface can make those conversations a lot more fruitful, so that it is more of an advancement conversation and less of just a salary conversation. And like, how do I get to the place where I want to be? I want to be working more on this. I would like to, ultimately move over to this kind of team. Like, whatever you're really asking for, I think it's kind of more about the introspection of like, what am I really after? Because money is like really great, it does a lot of good things, but it's not the thing that you're thinking about 8 hours a day when you're, conservatively actually showing up and doing the work.
That's a really great point. I was also going to touch upon that whenever you're picking a new job or deciding between multiple jobs, or even your current job, you should also, I try to do an analytical like spreadsheet or like comparison. Definitely take account of all the non-measurable aspects as well, which is people, opportunity, stock potential, little things like 401k match, or like tools that the company uses, the big bold bets, the culture, And these are, it's hard to put a number, but based on your scale of either do a 1 to 10, or if you want to put a number against it, oftentimes people just go by numbers. It's like, oh, this one is paying me 30K more, XK more, but they very early on in their job actually figure out that it's not the culture I wanted. I'm not gonna get promotions as quickly. The tools they use are not the ones that are the latest and the greatest, or it's not working out with the management style. So these are also very hard to put a number against it, but very important day to day. You don't want XK more at the cost of some mental tension and stress every day, toxicity, and medical bills going up, things to also consider. So very good point, Caitlin, that I would want to plus one and double down, something to consider.
Awesome. These are all fantastic points. So I guess we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to leave it open for questions if anyone has them of our excellent panel or of the group. But I guess my final question is, what are some of your biggest kind of negotiation mistakes or lessons learned? Like, I certainly have some like things that I could have done, or I could have leaned in more, or I could have, stood up for myself or pushed back a little bit, or even stood up for other people when they were having some of those difficult conversations in the workplace. So do you have any kind of mistakes or lessons learned? And if so, what are they, and how have you course corrected in the future?
I can try to go first. I think the number one I would say is like preparation is so key. To Molly's point about and Nika's point about rehearsing or creating bullet points, or even creating a decision tree. If this person says this, then I will say this in response. If you need to go to that level of detail to have a really prepared conversation with your potential employer, I think do it. I think another thing that one mistake I made very recently is just accepting a lower salary or a lower title because the opportunity is different from where you've been, right? So moving from like a startup to a big public company, or vice versa. I think there's a lot of different negotiation tactics that employers use to try and, whether it's like lowballing you or creating incentive for you to work harder. Just know that those things exist, and that just because it's different doesn't mean that you deserve any less. And I think to Stephen's point earlier about like, the experience compounds, and where you're at today is a sort of a compilation of your experience, not some sort of direct lateral movement that may not match up one-to-one to where you've immediately been. So I think the last thing I'd say is just because your employer is more tenured or more experienced doesn't mean that their opinion is necessarily more valid. And so just, again, going back to being prepared and 100% confident in what you have to offer, and making sure that you've done the research and have the data to back it up. All of that's really important in going forward.
Happy to share. Yeah, there's so many here. Happy to share some of my experiences. I guess I would say knowing what actually matters is important, and then being specific about what those things are is really important. And so I guess from a personal experience, when I was negotiating, I actually, at the time, and I think of course, different set of circumstances, but at the time I thought I wanted different things. Like I thought I wanted exposure to other types of work at Emerson. So I really actually negotiated quite hard for what falls into the scope of my work, which is, it's tricky because that's a lot more amorphous. Like, what does that really mean? And whereas I think had I decided to use a lot of my goodwill towards maybe negotiating for a different title, I think that would have been different. I think so. I think the one big takeaway for me is, how do you actually so think about what you want, and think about whether the person on the other side can actually deliver that, and think about, like, is it actually something that's easily measurable and concrete? I think that wasn't clear for me when I went into my last negotiation. And I think we think about that a bunch in venture as well. I think related to that is, how do you be creative? How do you not think just within the couple of things that are out in front of you? There's a bunch more levers that you can pull than you realize. So just think a little bit more creatively, beyond just like your base salary. Beyond, I think I was thinking salary, I was thinking PTO. I didn't even think about, to be honest, title as something that could be negotiated upon. Now I know. But anyway, I think those are the two things. Like, what do you actually really want? How do you be specific about it? Is it measurable? Is it concrete? And then how can you be creative in that entire journey?
I would echo the same thing, and something that I've already called out, which is like, if there are multiple options in front of you, I think your gut feeling already tells you you're going to lean towards one versus the other. It's just something during the process, or just the culture of the company, or the mission-driven companies, you just gravitate towards that more. But within that, recruiters these days, at least my experience has been, are very transparent. They're not there to necessarily lowball you, or they are your advocate, right? So ask good questions. They are very flexible. They will tell you where they are flexible, or the company has been flexible. In my case, I mean, maybe you'll say that was a long time ago. When I joined Uber almost 4 years ago, the recruiter was very transparent. It's like, we believe in Uber, and equity is where we will lean in more. Everything else is kind of set. And I knew in the heart of my heart that I wanted this front row seat to the kind of experience that I was getting. And so I knew equity is where I could go more. So try to ask upfront questions instead of giving answers. California, like, learn your state. California law says that recruiters and companies are not supposed to ask you the salary expectations. So don't give away your cards initially, but don't be too conservative either, because they're just gauging as to like whether this will even go long term or not. If you're looking for an entry level position, but the position is a director level, like, early on, don't waste each other's time, but at the same time, know what laws are there in your state, but at the same time, ask good questions, and that will help you figure out where you can negotiate or fine tune your overall offer. By the end of the day, I feel like, especially if you're going for a mission or something, then that mission will drive you. And I think that has been very, at least in my case, I had an amazing ride. And I think in a way, I asked for more equity. I was more of a shareholder, and that probably drove me to build this also in a way.
Yeah, 100%. I'll say, Trupti, on that point, I think that signals something to your future employer, that you're committed to the mission and to the work that you're going to be doing, and that you're passionate about it. And I think that's huge, whether you're at a private or a public company. One other thing I think I forgot to add that I did recently that I hadn't done in the past is leveraging your network. If you know that there's somebody who can vouch for you, give you a good review, and you know that you're somehow in a roundabout way potentially connected to your new employer through that person, like, it's okay to name drop, and it's okay to say, I worked with this person and this was a good experience. So I think often employers will do a little bit of background research and find out, like, hey, this guy's a hardball negotiator. Is he worth what he's asking for? And I think that's been successful for me in the past too.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Any other final words of advice or things people want to share in the group?
I wanted to share a link to a masterclass that is led by Chris Voss. He's an FBI hostage negotiator. I went through the masterclass, and I thought the psyche of negotiation that he went through was incredibly interesting. So I just wanted to share that here with everyone in case you just love to learn more about the art of negotiation.
Amazing. Thank you. That's so cool. I will definitely check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Molly, for pulling this together. And Nika, Joe, Trupti, really appreciate all of your insights. This is it's such an interesting topic, I think, for everybody, but especially, you know, we're coming from a very data oriented point of view, and a lot of us are coming from like individual contributor technical backgrounds where this sometimes is a really uncomfortable thing. It's sort of not our wheelhouse. So really appreciate all the advice and your perspectives on some of these challenges. So thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a really great afternoon.
I'll leave my contact open if
Absolutely.
anyone wants to reach out.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.